Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This video was supposed to come out way sooner, much closer to the 4th of July, along with our presidential tier list video as kind of a, 4th of July special. But it's coming out now because of work and school and the fact that I'm lazy, so... If you've been watching this channel for a while, you might notice that I seem to praise 39th US President Jimmy Carter quite a lot. And Paul Rudd is one of the most lovable, immortal beings ever, right up there with Jimmy Carter. Because who doesn't love a little bit of controversy? Why do you think I'm wearing my Carter Mondale shirt?
Jimmy Carter, because of the vibes. A.
To be controversial, but yeah, I agree, probably A tier. So since me and Callum are both making US history related videos for the 4th of July, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity to explain my totally not controversial opinion that Jimmy Carter is one of the best US presidents. In a culture that seems so hyper-focused on presidential ethics as to slam politicians on both sides of the political spectrum for even the slightest misstep, it seems wrong that a person who vowed never to lie to the American people, and for the most part lived up to that promise, and who valued doing what was right over what was politically advantageous, would be so forgotten and so criticized by history as Jimmy Carter. In the latest C-SPAN presidential ranking, Carter ranked 26th. That is below Andrew Jackson. Andrew freaking Jackson! The guy who is responsible for the Trail of Tears and tried to ban anti-slavery literature from the South. And how is the man who consistently promoted and advocated world peace throughout his life, and who is one of the only presidents who never had a single troop die in combat under his presidency, ranked lower than people like LBJ, who killed 58,000 Americans in Vietnam out of pride, or Truman, who nuked 2 cities because, I don't know, he thought it would be pretty cool or something? Okay, enough griping about popular contemporary presidential rankings. Let's talk about why this guy is the best. He was born James Earl Carter Jr. on October 1st, 1924 to Baptist peanut farmers in Plains, Georgia. He graduated from Annapolis Naval Academy in 1946, which Winky married Rosalind Smith. He then served 7 years as a naval officer and submarine engineer before returning to Plains, Georgia to take up his father's peanut farm after his death. But instead of fading into obscurity as a peanut farmer, it was at this time that he entered state politics by first winning a seat to the state senate in 1962 and then the governorship in 1970. As governor, he took a hard stance on racial equality, which was a pretty gutsy thing to do in Georgia in the 1960s and 70s. As a matter of fact, prior to becoming governor, he was the only white male in Plains, Georgia to not join the White Citizens Council, which is exactly what it sounds like. An organization bent on maintaining segregation and white supremacy in the South. And when his local church voted on whether or not to integrate, he and his wife Rosalind were only 2 of 3 votes in favor of integration. As governor, he famously declared,
"I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over."
He didn't follow that statement by increasing the number of African Americans in Georgia's government by about 25%. At this time, the nation was also reeling from the Watergate scandal.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Which opened up the perfect opportunity for Carter. He tossed his name into the presidential ring, running on the fact that he was a good moral Christian who was not Nixon or Ford. Usually running on simply the fact that you're not the other guy doesn't work unless you're faced with moral depravity, which we have most recently seen with Biden. Carter narrowly beat Ford and became the 39th President of the United States.
Well, nevertheless, Harry, the next president will be Jimmy Carter, and our ABC News count shows these projected electoral votes 272 for Carter, only 2 more than the absolute minimum needed by the winner, and 235 for Mr. Ford.
So what did Carter do as president? Well, to say it frankly, he kicked everyone off and got voted out of office. See, political parties such as the Democratic Party that Carter would belong to are okay with talk about morality and honesty in government when you are running as a reactionary candidate against one of the most corrupt administrations in U.S. history, and it is causing you to win elections. However, once you're in power and you start talking about doing the right and moral things as opposed to the things that help the party stay in power, they get understandably very upset, and that is exactly what happened with Carter and the Democrats. Carter became president at a time of record high inflation coupled with high unemployment, a phenomenon that wasn't supposed to ever be able to happen according to the economists of the time. To make things worse, the country was also teetering on the edge of a recession. So Carter was faced with two opposite responses. He could drastically cut spending and impose strict monetary restrictions to avoid inflation, or he could invest in social programs and stimulate the economy to avoid recession. Republicans favored the former and Democrats the latter. At first, he tried both, a careful balancing act where he would achieve liberal ends with conservative means. However, he eventually rightfully decided that inflation was the bigger threat and insisted on fiscal conservatism. To say that this infuriated the Democrats would be an understatement. He once said, "I wish some of you could have sat in on some of our leadership meetings and just seen the stricken expressions on the faces of the Democratic leaders when I was talking about balancing the budget, which was anathema to them. That wasn't something a Democratic president was supposed to do." So even in that early phase, I'm talking about the spring of '77, I was already getting strong opposition from my Democratic leadership in dealing with economics. All they knew about it was stimulus and Great Society programs. Although he wasn't able to accomplish his goal of a balanced budget in any of his 4 years as president, he was able to reduce the national debt over his conservative predecessor, keeping it well under $1 trillion, while also creating 8 million additional jobs. An economic record that honestly isn't bad. He additionally broke from the Democratic Party by making tackling climate change and global warming a big part of his agenda, becoming the first president in history to do so. Consequently, as president, he doubled the national park system, tripled the amount of protected forests, and installed solar panels on the White House. As president, he signed 15 major pieces of environmental legislation, including the first funding of green energy, the first toxic waste cleanup, and the first fuel economy standards. America was also going through a massive energy crisis at the time, and many of his policies and initiatives to deal with that additionally benefited the environment.
2 days from now, I will present to the Congress my energy proposals. Its members will be my partners, and they have already given me a great deal of valuable advice. Many of these proposals will be unpopular. Some will cause you to put up with inconveniences and to make sacrifices. The most important thing about these proposals is that the alternative may be a national catastrophe.
Including taxing vehicles that burn excessive amounts of fuel, improving automobile fuel efficiency, decreasing our dependence on oil by millions of barrels per day, creating initiatives for switching to solar and other alternative energy sources, creating the Department of Energy, and asking Congress to close foreign tax loopholes that give unnecessary benefits to major oil companies. A lot of Carter's policies center around long-term solutions as opposed to quick fixes whose effects are temporarily but quickly felt by the public and therefore could benefit him in re-election. His vice president, Walter Mondale, once said, "The worst thing you could say to Carter if you wanted him to do something was that it was politically the best thing to do." He saw party politics and interest groups as sinful and most politicians as corrupt and self-interested. Some people argue that this was arrogant and naive of him, but I honestly can't say that I disagree with him. Speaking of doing unpopular things, remember how I said earlier that LBJ is responsible for the deaths of over 58,000 US troops in Vietnam? Well, guess who granted all the draft dodgers a universal pardon? And you know how Ronald Reagan is praised by conservatives for his deregulation of businesses? Well, guess who actually started that by deregulating transportation and natural gas? Carter's deregulation of airlines allowed millions of middle-class Americans to fly on planes for the first time, while his deregulation of natural gas was a major step to U.S. energy independence. And what about the freeing of the American hostages from Iran? Again, not Reagan. As a matter of fact, it recently came out that Reagan's administration was working behind the scenes trying to keep the hostages in Iran until he became president so he could take credit for it. All the while, Carter was tirelessly working to free the hostages even after it had caused him to lose the election. As a matter of fact, he even refused to run against his Democratic challenger in the primaries, Edward Kennedy, just to spend more time in the White House to work for their release. Also, remember that very lucrative canal we built across Panama that connected the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean? Carter was like, you know what, I think Panama should own its own canal, and just gave it back to them. But Carter's presidency wasn't just ticking off all of his Democratic and Republican colleagues. He was solidly a Democrat and from a solidly Democratic family. As a result, he pursued and achieved a number of liberal and progressive accomplishments as well, including increasing the minimum wage, appointing a record number of women, blacks, and Hispanics to government jobs, signing the first major mental health bill, creating the Department of Education, creating FEMA, establishing the Mine Safety and Health Administration. However, Jimmy Carter's biggest achievement was by far the mediation of the Camp David Accords between Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin that ended 30 years of conflict between the two countries and helped lay a foundation for peace in the Middle East. As a matter of fact, global peace has been a major theme of Carter's entire administration, which is in sharp contrast to most US presidents who are notoriously bloodthirsty and violent. Again, LBJ. For instance, he oversaw the end of the SALT II talks with the Soviet Union, and despite it not resulting in a nuclear reduction treaty, Carter maintained his hard stance against nuclear weapons and irritated the Soviet Union by insisting that they make internal improvements regarding human rights within their own country. This did not improve our relations with the Russians, nor did Carter's withdrawal from the Summer Olympics in Moscow after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, something that, again, was very unpopular with Americans because of consumerism or some crap. Our lack of value on peace and our overemphasis on results is something that always baffles me about how we rank past and present US presidents. Like, why is James K. Polk held as a great president when he essentially pulled a Putin on Mexico? Sure, it had a beneficial impact on the United States, but is that all we care about? Results. By the time the 1980 elections rolled around, Carter had no significant base, being considered too liberal for conservatives and too conservative for liberals. Not to mention the fact that gas prices and inflation were higher than they had ever been under Carter, due to the 1979 Iranian Revolution and subsequent oil embargo, so it was no surprise that Ronald Reagan easily beat Carter in an electoral landslide. Reagan got 489 electoral votes to Carter's 49. Jimmy Carter was incredibly unpopular and remained so throughout all of the Reagan years, only recently saw a rise in popularity. By all means, he was a failure of a politician. Now, you might be like, hold up, how could you say he was a failure of a politician? I thought this video was going to talk about how he was one of the best US presidents. Well, here's the thing. It's true that Jimmy Carter was a failed politician, and by most modern presidential ranking criteria, a failed president. But is that a bad thing. What makes a good leader? Is good politician synonymous with good president? Is a president's job to create a coalition in a political machine to manipulate it into producing an agenda that hopefully includes more good than bad? If so, then yes, Jimmy Carter was a terrible president. Are popularity or electability hallmarks of good leadership? If so, then yes, Jimmy Carter was a bad president. Or alternatively, is good leadership doing what's right for your people and for your country, even if you know they will hate you for it? Even if you know you likely won't win a second term. Perhaps in the mad scramble for re-election that dominates American politics, we are missing the entire point of what it means to be president. Maybe what this country needs is less good politicians and more bad presidents who simply care about doing right by people and less about power. Just food for thought, but I'm getting off topic. Let's return to Jimmy Carter. Now, this might ordinarily be where I would end this video, but it's not, because Jimmy Carter did not stop being awesome even after he left the presidency. As a matter of fact, it could be argued that his presidency was actually the least significant part of his life, and many claim that Jimmy Carter actually has one of the best post-presidencies of any US president, being compared to the likes of John Quincy Adams and William Howard Taft, who, contrary to the belief of someone I know, did not die in a bathtub.
It's the guy who got stuck in the bath. I kind of want to rank him higher because I feel really bad that he got stuck in the bath. I mean, that's a horrible way to die.
That was how he died. He got out. Upon leaving the presidency, instead of moving into a multi-million-dollar mansion like most former presidents, no, the president who ate off paper plates and sold the presidential yacht moved back into his two-bedroom ranch house that he built for himself in Plains, Georgia in 1961. There, he continued to make his own yogurt and shop at a local dollar store, as well as continue to teach Sunday school at his local church. In 1982, he founded the Carter Center, which sought to promote democracy and human rights around the world. Additionally, he also served as a freelance ambassador in which he would monitor elections and help to eradicate infectious diseases, and occasionally make his successors mad for trying to do their jobs for them. Such initiatives included trying to settle conflicts in the Middle East and ease nuclear tensions in North Korea. As a matter of fact, his efforts to promote world peace eventually earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. Jimmy Carter has also been heavily involved in Habitat for Humanity, where he would help build houses for the poor and underprivileged even into his old age. So in conclusion, Jimmy Carter was a terrible politician, but all around just the definition of a cool dude. And some days I can't help but feel that even though he's 98 years old, he has to be better than what we've got.
All right, check this out. It's the number of years Trump could face in jail if convicted on all counts of the classified documents case. It's still counting. It goes up to 140.